I have a blog and a podcast called Jimmy's Intention. Like I'm in a state of tension, not my intention to do something. Although you could interpret it both ways. And it was yeah, I'm a critical thinking professor among other things. So I'm always very interested in debate. And when I say debate, I don't necessarily mean formal debate, but I'm interested in how people process information, what they believe and why they believe it, and looking at both sides of issues. So I kind of live in that tension just by nature. That's kind of who I am. And so Jimmy's Intention, that's what it was about. So, but I
Amazing.
stopped doing it actually. But
So you must love watching what's going on in the US at the moment, coming up to election time.
do I love it? Well, I mean, it's definitely interesting. But when I look at what's going on in the country, it's well, actually, even the world. I mean, it's not even just the U.S. You know, the world is becoming so tribal and isolated and isolationist in general that that's very concerning to me. Because when I say I'm in tension, I mean I am very much interested in bringing people together. How do we have productive conversations? You know, how do we have civil dialogue? And I'm a communications professor, so I just notice even little things, you know, words people use when they're talking that don't advance the conversation or move anything forward. And so, yeah, so yes, what's happening in the US is definitely very interesting, but at the same time, it's very concerning as well. And I think for the first time in my life, I'm wondering, damn, not every dynasty lasts forever. You know, how might
Huh,
this one end? So,
got it. So you think this polarization is really like a new development, like worse
well, I
than
mean,
you've ever seen it in your life?
yeah, well, I'm 60, you know, so I've obviously, you know, seen a lot change in my lifetime. But the polarization now, and I would contribute primarily to social media, where everybody feels incumbent to have an opinion, incumbent to take a side, incumbent to get you to see things my way. You know, that yeah, I think it's on hyper speed. Of course, it's always been there my entire life, but it's um, it's really bad right now. You know, and I think when people talk, when they're saying, "Oh, well, this group thinks this or does this," they always tend. I just did it. I said always. They generally tend to give us the most extreme example of that point of view, as opposed to kind of a more normalized example of that point of view. So,
Hmm.
um, yeah. So
So is
having civil dialogue now is tough. It's rough.
and is would always be an example of that, the type of thing that doesn't move the conversation forward, like the black and white, no nuance
Yeah, you know,
language.
I tell my students if you're ever taking, you know, a multiple choice test or a true false, if the question has always in it or never, it's probably always false because there's very few things in life that are always, every, never. You know, very few things are just that, as you said, black and white. In fact, very few things, if anything, are. So, yes, there's little ways to have conversations, acknowledging others' points of views, trying to find the common ground if there is any to be found, and then building off of that point. So, so when I say debate, you know, when I use that word, or even uh, argumentation, I don't mean I use it in such a way where it isn't about one side wins and one side loses. It's about a thesis encountering an antithesis and coming up with a synthesis of ideas. So it's not this side wins or this side loses or this side wins and this side loses. It's, oh no, if we come together enough, we can kind of come to a different place, both sides. And maybe that's not possible, but maybe it is. And I think it's certainly more possible than what we're seeing now.
Yeah,
So.
or at least both sides learn something ideally throughout the conversation.
Yeah, and even if it just having that conversation just doesn't lead to agreement, but it leads to greater understanding and empathy of that point of view. You know, in my class, in my argumentation, my critical thinking class, I have students, and I don't tell them this, they have to write two arguments. And I said, okay, what the first argument, what do you feel passionate about? I mean, I want you to pick something you feel strongly about, and I'm gonna teach you how to write an argument. We're gonna write an argument in support of that. So they'll pick whatever it is they're, you know, hugely passionate about and really care about. But what I don't tell them is, okay, I want to work with them. For the very last argument, the second, they have to argue the other side of that same argument. Like, what? That's like a dirty trick you just pulled on us. And I said, well, if you created the first argument correctly, you should already have the other side completely outlined in your head, because the first thing we do when we disagree with somebody is we try to find out why they think the way they do, why they believe the way they do. What is their rationale for their position and point of view? And so it should be easy theoretically, because I say the first thing you do when you research your argument is you research the other side, and you might be surprised to find the other side is a lot closer to you than you thought. Happens all
Mm,
the time. So
mm. Yeah, that is such an important skill to teach. I'm so glad that is still being taught in the
uh,
education system.
I well, I'm only one person, and I hope it's being taught. You know, hope it's prevalent, but
Mm,
I don't see it a lot. I don't even see it a lot in academia. I just see a lot of agendas and people trying to get their anti-Trump or whatever it happens to be, as opposed to, hey, let's teach critical thinking skills. Let's teach how to have a dialogue. So I tell my students, I don't give a shit what you believe. It doesn't matter. I don't care if you're radically conservative, radically liberal. I want to teach you how to best express those ideas in a productive, civil way that can lead to potentially more agreement and more unity, or at the very least, at least more understanding.
hmm Yeah, and at least non-violence, I guess, which is something we take for granted, but we probably can't, like the state of affairs at the moment.
Well, you know what? It's interesting. I listen to a podcast series called Open to Debate, where they just debate everything you could possibly think of. And there's one woman that they interviewed on that show who was a woman after my own heart. Just really wants to see people of different political persuasions at least sit at the table and attempt to have these dialogues. But at the very end, she said, the reality is human beings have had war since the beginning of time. Always have had it. We continue to have it. So is it kind of a theoretical pie in the sky idea to think we can do that? Probably, but it doesn't mean we can't try. It doesn't mean we can't have pockets of civility and progress in an otherwise pretty crazy world. What's happening in Israel and Ukraine. And we see this divisiveness even in my own family. It's There's things I can't talk about with my own family without it
Mm.
being, without it going someplace that is, could potentially be very divisive. So,
Mm. I feel like all families have those.
yeah, I
Families
guess
can be
so. I
like
guess
the
so.
most triggering places for, because there's so much behind it. It's like, it's not just like, oh, you don't agree with me. It's like, do you love me? It's like underneath all of that.
Right, right. Yeah, it's very layered in its complexity, family relationships and these conversations. And I just, I tend to be one that I would just rather not talk about these things with loved ones, for the most part. So, I mean, right now with the whole Israeli-Palestinian thing, I have a lot of friends who are Jewish, who are Israeli. I have a lot of students, a lot of people I know who are Palestinian. And my position is I am completely I don't take one. I'm neutral, and I feel like that's a rare position. People think like, oh well, you got to take a side. It's like my side is peace, and my side is observing this tragedy and being sad for it. And I, as a single person, am not going to solve anything. But other people tend to be more vocal about it, and that's
Yeah,
fine. It's just not it's not the way I do it.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. People can get upset about that as well. Like I had someone really trying, just out of nowhere, trying to get me to condemn like certain actions, but it's like, why do you need this from me right now? Like what? And just by me saying like I don't want to get into this right now, made me this like bad person because I refuse to like set. It's like things are so much more complex than that, and I don't think it helps by forcing people to like wear a badge
Well,
saying,
and again, going back to whole the social, look, I'm not really kind of a social media dystopian person, because I think there's positive and negative. But I do think one of the byproducts of social media is, oh, you haven't posted your black button today. You don't support, like, you haven't done, like, there's this peer pressure constantly to act. And what I find really interesting, at least like on my social media feeds, people feel very comfortable expressing their position if it tends to be the position of the majority or the perceived majority. Um, very few people like on my feed are Trump supporters, and I think those of the Trump supporters who I know they are Trump supporters, they feel silenced. They feel like they can't say anything, or the mob will get them. And to me, that's tragic. And truth be told, I'm not a Trump supporter either, but I think by vilifying those who do support, we're not moving an agenda forward. People have their own
Mm.
reasons to support whoever they support, and I'm going to respect those reasons, whatever they might be, whether I agree with them or not. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, that's the pro-democratic stance. If you believe in a democracy, you believe people should be able to vote for the party that you don't like.
yeah, and
Um,
and I'm kind of a traditional kind of old school free speech liberal in that way. It used to be that kind of position of everybody has the right to talk was kind of a very progressive '60s radical point of view, and now it's like it's evolved to be like the conservative point of view. It's like free speech is almost a buzzword for Republican. And it's like, when did that happen? This is, it's bizarre the way things, evolve and how they move and why they move. And all that stuff really interests me. It, and it would interest me a lot more if it didn't scare me so much, because I do think the consequences, can really be dire. I think when people say, the United States is, on the precipice of a civil war, I don't think that's necessarily an overstatement. I really don't. I really
hmm.
don't. I don't know what that's going to look like or what's going to happen, but it's interesting. I'm 60. I'm kind of glad I'm not 20. I'm not sure I want to see what's ahead, but anyway.
Oh, God. Okay. I'll safely stay on this side of the pond then.
Hey, by
Um,
the way, you say pond. Where are you anyway? I have no idea.
I'm in London.
Oh, whereabouts?
Pimlico?
Pinwicker. My daughter lives in the Heath.
Pimlico.
Pimlico,
Yeah.
like the racetrack. There's a Pimlico
Like right
racetrack.
near Westminster.
Okay. I act like I've been to London dozens of times, and my daughter lives there, and I act like I know it really well. But then you say Pimlico, and like I
Wh-
have no idea.
Whereabouts is she?
She's Hampstead Heath, like that
Oh,
general area.
beautiful.
Yeah, very, very
Yeah.
central London. I taught for a semester in London. Um,
Whereabouts?
oh gosh, central London, right by. In fact, it was the University of Central London's building that I taught in. So right by the British Museum, kind of that general area down there.
Cool. Wait, UCL?
What?
Was it at UCL?
Yes, yeah, UCL.
Oh, yeah, University College London.
Yes. No, it wasn't. We basically just used their facilities. It was a California program where basically we take all the students you would normally have in California and we just all go do the same thing in London. So it wasn't like I was teaching for a London. I was
Oh,
still getting
got it, got it,
paid by
got it.
California.
Got it.
But it was
Cool.
great. I got to know London fairly well. It was good. So
Okay.
wait, is that a British accent though?
No, I'm Australian. From
Yeah,
Melbourne.
that's, even though they're kind of similar to this ear, uh, I know it didn't quite sound British.
And I used to live in New York, but I kind of, yeah, I was there when Trump was elected the first time. Yeah, even back then, I was kind of like, what is this division through this country with the two-party system? It just, because you just don't get that so much in a parliamentary system because the leaders kind of, it's more chosen by the party, it's less. And the leaders can be replaced, it happens where the
Right.
leader's not up to scratch. I mean, it's happened so many multiple times in this country recently. Um, but you don't get that die hard, like you are a Democrat for life kind of thing, or you are So I was just kind of like, I don't think this is good. And that was back then, so I can't imagine how much it's changed now. Like I was just reading about the MSNBC aren't even they won't even like use Trump's name. They were like the candidate has won in this state, and they like wouldn't show his victory speech because they're like, we
Well,
don't
yeah,
want to
and he's
show
also getting
untruth.
voted off the ballots in some states here. The state of Colorado won't put him on the presidential ballot because they said because of the insurrection. Um, and again, I get both sides of that argument. I thought what happened January 6th, 2020, that's what it was, right? January 2021. Whatever happened during that quote unquote insurrection, I thought was just horrible and it was disgusting. So, I mean, I can kind of see if you really think he's going to someone out to overthrow the government, why you wouldn't want him on your ballot. But I think there's probably just a genuine hatred of the man that's fueling that more than any kind of legal convictions,
Mm,
unfortunately.
mm,
So,
mm. Okay, let's get into your story. I'm interested. Wait, does Jordan know we're doing this, by the way?
yeah, I told him. I think I told him last night. Yeah.
And what did he say?
Oh, he just laughed. He thought it was funny. He thought it was good. But I go. You guys brought me up a few times. He goes, we did. He didn't even remember. I said,
Yeah, because
yeah.
he said that. He was like, because I was asking, like, oh, wait, but how did your parents grow up and how did they meet? And he was like, I was like, what did your dad think about this? He's like, you should just interview my dad because I
Yeah,
can't.
yeah, exactly. I was at the park walking when I heard that, and I thought, hell yeah, interview me.
So was
So,
it accurate the way he described you and your, the incident at the church, be
yeah,
saying like you're allowed to make your own mind up about Jesus, and then kind of the congregation not reacting well to that?
yeah. Back then, I was under the illusion. I believed in the general principles of the Christian faith. The love of the Christ, laying your life down for a friend. I think I just very beautiful Christian principles. But I was never much of a fan of kind of the evangelical Christianity machine, and it is a machine. I mean, and that's I could really probably flesh that out by saying, I thought, well, if I start my own congregation or my own church, which I did, we can kind of get away from this kind of the machine of Christianity and kind of develop our own identity of what it means to be a Christian, what it means to follow Jesus, and I found out over a period of years that you can't overcome the beast of American evangelical Christianity. It's huge, it's mammoth, it's an industry. And people may listen to what you have to say, but then they also read books and listen to other people, and they're influenced by a variety of factors. So I just found out I foolishly and naively thought, well, if I kind of start my own, I can do it with kind of as my own brand. But that was incorrect. I couldn't. And so the things that I disliked about the church and Christianity never went away. And so I would tell people the whole time I was in ministry, I started as an associate pastor at another church and then started my own, 10 years later or something like that. I would tell people from day one, I am this close to walking out of the church and never coming back. And I would say this my first year in ministry as a 32-year-old guy. I would say that all the time. I'm this close. I'm this close. Even though I was thick in it, I was doing it. I was preaching on Sunday, everything. I would just encounter some things. I go, I'm this close. I'm this close to just turning around and never coming back. And then finally, one day it happened. That event happened at the church that day. And I said, what am I doing? I've been saying this for years. The day has come. And that was like in December of 2005, I think it was. And outside of a wedding or a funeral, I haven't been inside a church since.
Huh. So what actually happened on that day?
Well, see, in Christianity, at least the way I was raised in kind of that evangelical brand of Christianity, So much of it is what I would term an intellectual assent to a proposition. Just say Jesus is Lord. Believe Jesus is Lord. It's like it's all cognitive. Like if you believe something, you'll go to heaven. If you believe something, you're in the club. And not to diminish belief, I think belief is important, but in my mind, the heart of Christianity isn't an intellectual assent. It's a behavioral one. It's displaying love. It's love your neighbor like you love yourself. And it isn't like belief isn't important or come into play, but that's not the heart. And so basically, in a nutshell, people want to be told what to think. They want to be told what to believe. And they want to be told that we are doing the right thing. They want to be told. And so that one morning that I think Jordan brought up, it's probably the most people we ever had in the church, my little church plant that I was doing. And the whole theme for that day, I think Jordan brought this up. Again, we probably have a little bit different perception. I was the one in front doing it, so he was in the back. Um, but that day, the whole theme of the day was basically what I just told you. It's like the heart of Christianity is not about being able to say, I believe in Jesus. It's acting like Jesus. And they're saying, well, you saying it's not important to believe Jesus is the only way? I go, no, I'm not saying that. They go, well, say it. I go, I'm not going to say that. I would be defeating everything I'm trying to tell you right now if I succumb and say that, because it's not about that. It's not about this intellectual climb of believing propositions at heart. I'm not going to say there's no place for that, but it's not the heart and soul and the centrality of the faith as I see it. And so they would have nothing. Maybe Lutheran congregations, Methodist congregations would have no trouble with that. But as far as like more conservative evangelical American congregations, that just doesn't work. They want to be told. They want
Huh.
that series of propositions. In my experience, again, I come from a very conservative tradition, so I'm sure there's other traditions that are quite different from that, but it wasn't mine. So.
Okay, so can we go back to the start and learn about how you grew up and then how that you ended up
Yeah,
on that pathway?
I grew up in Burbank, California, and it's a very blue collar family. My dad was a driver for the studios, delivered scripts to stars' houses and things. And my mom, well, while I was growing up, she was a stay at home mom, but she was a registered nurse. And then when we got older and we were raised, and I was in high school, she went back to nursing. So, um, oh, I hear Jordan's grandson in the other room. Stay out. Um, but we grew up Catholic, and I'm fairly strong. I went to Catholic school, for the first 8 years of schooling, first through eighth grade, and I never really bought into all of Catholicism, but it was my faith, and it did give me kind of a kind of a Christian worldview. And so when I got to high school, I kind of took that Christian worldview and kind of solidified it more in a Protestant evangelical tradition and moved away from Catholicism that way. But I would say both Jordan's mom and my partner Renee, um, we always both saw Christianity eye to eye. Like it was more of a means to engage. We saw the church as, oh, that's a great place to go if you want to help people. That's a great place to go for activity and that kind of thing. It really didn't meet our social needs so much. And so I was very serious. That's the other thing about Renee and I. You can call us whatever you want. We're not hypocrites. Like if we say we're doing something, we do it. And you realize, well, that's a pretty rare quality. A lot of people just kind of don't see the world that way. So like when we were in Christianity, we were very serious about it. I mean, we took it very seriously. And growing up Catholic, I certainly grew up with the fear of God in me and that kind of thing. But I think eventually who you are is manifested in life, and I think the real you eventually rises to the top and comes out. And that was really just never me. It was really just, I think, just a parroting of the way I grew up, and just kind of following. It was familiar.
Did your parents grow up in California as well?
No, my dad actually he was born in Buffalo, New York, but the rest of his family was born in Hungary. And they came here, had him, and I think they even went back for a couple of years after they had him here. And then my mom was from Brooklyn, New York. So they met in New York, or excuse me, they grew up in New York, but they met here. And both Catholic, kind of Irish Catholic, very, very strict in their own way. So,
And did you have siblings, or do you have siblings?
yes, I have two older sisters. And
And
both
what?
both my parents just like my mom passed away in 2017 and my dad just passed away last October. Um, so yeah, that changes your perspective on life quite a bit too. I'm kind of a 60-year-old orphan.
Huh? Did you stay close to them throughout your life?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I did.
And what was it that they wanted for you growing up?
It's funny. They're both very blue collar. Well, my mom went to some college, but she never got her degree. She had to go to some college to get her nursing, certificate. Um, but education was not a value at all for my parents. It was earning money was the value. So, I knew when I was like on the speech team in high school, just because I liked it. I go, there's a team where you can just compete by talking. That's awesome. Um, I love public speaking. I loved it. I just always loved it. I was competing in the eighth grade. I just, for whatever reason, it was terrifying to me, but thrilling in a very positive way at the same time. So I grew up with that, but they didn't value education. So when it came time to go to school, I said, "Well, I want to go to. I don't want to just get a job at the gas station now. you know, I, I want to go to school." And I don't think either one of them really understood that. Like, why? Like, why don't you want to go out and make money? And I don't think they took me seriously. They didn't pay for it. I paid for all my schooling. And I think once they saw I was serious about it, that because I was never much of a student, only because not that I couldn't have been, but I was just more social. I just played football and basketball, had parties and fun. So I never really cared that much about academics since I really wasn't college ready. So I did go to community college, and community college really prepared me, um, for higher education and university life. But there was really no support from my parents at all because they had no framework. So I was the first one in my family to get a college degree, anybody on any side. And then I
And
actually ended up getting two master's degrees.
amazing. So what was it that appealed to you about higher education?
You know what? It was really my subject matter, communication studies. I'm really a sociologist at heart. I love studying people. I love studying people and the way they make decisions and the way they function and the way they interact and the way they connect or not connect. I'm just fascinated by people. And I'm an introvert. I mean, I really am. I'm not a big, go out and talk to everybody kind of guy, but I'm an observer. I love just to watch. And so I would take a public speaking class or a small group communication class or an interpersonal communication class. I'd be like, I love this shit. This is fascinating to me. And I remember sitting there, 18, 19 years old, and I would look at my communication studies professors and I go, that asshole, he is getting paid to talk about this stuff. Like I would do this for free. I just love it. And, so I tell my students now, like, if you don't not sure what you want to do in life, look around and what are you jealous of? Like, what are you like, God, if I only could do that, that might give you a sense of direction of what you should be doing. So, but of course I always had that, but really I really scratched that itch in the form of ministry and preaching and that kind of thing for many years until that fateful day where I got run out of town. And then I fortunately had always been a part-time adjunct professor even while I was in ministry. I didn't even need the money. It was just I just enjoyed it. I used to go 1 or 2 nights a week and go teach at a university in the San Fernando Valley, and I just loved it. So when it came time, well, I guess I'm switching careers now. It was nice to have 15, 20 years of teaching experience. So I got a tenured position fairly easily. So,
And so how were you supporting yourself growing up? Like
What do you
what
mean
were your
growing? Well, my parents supported me growing up.
but I mean through university if they weren't supporting you financially.
You know what? It's we live in such a user-friendly day and age where we're just trying to, wipe students' asses and give them everything. And it's like, and I have no framework for that because I had to scratch and claw for everything. So when it came time, I graduated high school, and I'm going to go out and find a job and go to school. And it took me a long time, but I finally found a job at an auto parts store. And the funny thing is I know nothing about cars. I could barely change my oil on a good day. But I'm willing to learn. So I got a job at an auto parts store, and I was working probably 35, 40 hours a week and taking 15, 17, 19 units of school at the same time. So, and I bought a car and I paid for my tuition. After about 2 years of community college, though, and they saw I was transferring to university, my mom, I think once she saw I was serious, she wanted to help me out. So she would give me some money every now and then for books or what have you. I think because she thought I wasn't a flake. Like, okay, this is something he really wants. And then she really became a fan of my academia. She loved it. Like, she came to my university graduation and supported it. She goes, Jim, why aren't you a lawyer? You need to be a lawyer. That's your gift. You can argue. You should be a lawyer. And, maybe she was right. I don't know. But it just wasn't in the cards, I guess, for me. So what I'm doing right now is what I absolutely love to do. I love it far more than ministry. Matter of fact, I feel like I'm more ministering to people now than I ever did in ministry. Now I'm actually really helping people. Before I was just getting critiqued and criticized and judged. Now I'm like, hey, thank you. I know how to do a speech now. That's very empowering. Like, and I almost feel like I'm doing more of the Lord's work now than I ever did in the Lord's name.
Nice. And so how did you make that transition from the Catholic upbringing to then into this evangelical community?
Well, it's actually in my world, it was a fairly common experience. A lot of people who grew up kind of Catholic, which is kind of more cold and institutionalized, but yet we still like some of its basic tenets, kind of floated into more of an evangelical Protestant thing. And it was really no more than when I was in high school. They had some of these evangelical kind of rallies. Gosh, I forget, what do you call it when you try to convert people? Like Billy Graham has these rallies. I've been out of it so long, I forget the terminology. But I went and I gave my life to Christ as like a 16-year-old. Which wasn't a far stretch because I was very religious anyway. But now it's just kind of a different brand of many of the same types of beliefs. Jesus' sacrifice didn't change, whether you're a Catholic or a Protestant. That whole, what they call propitiation act, remains the same. So even though there are some definite differences, there's enough similarities to make it a very smooth transition
Hmm.
for me.
And what did your parents think about
As all of us, me and my two sisters got older, they didn't really, they didn't take their faith as seriously. And then I remember too when this was a little bit later on, but when the whole pedophile priest thing came out, that's when my dad said, "Fuck the Catholic Church." Like, if that's gonna happen, if they're gonna allow pedophile priests, that tells me all I need to know about that church, because I can't believe anybody would still be a Catholic after that. So they kind of very lukewarm on it. In fact, when I was a pastor, they would come every Sunday and hear me preach.
it?
So
Wow.
they were very supportive, and
Huh.
my mom was so proud of me. God rest
Yeah,
her
it's
soul.
weird. I guess I'm asking because I'm Catholic, but and it would seem like and I guess I'm lucky because they did. I remember as a 5-year-old, the teacher saying like Adam and Eve isn't real, like at my Catholic school. Like it was always kind of that critical thinking, I guess, that I was exposed to in Australia. Anyway, but it's such a strong, I mean, sometimes I like to say it's like I'm Catholic, like some people are Jewish, like that actually their faith has nothing to do with it, but it's a
Yeah,
cultural thing. But
right.
so it would feel like treason to like change to like another type of Christianity. But I feel like maybe that's like the Irish thing coming in, and it's actually more like a political thing, and like screw England and the Protestants and
Well, you know
something.
what? I think though, like what you're describing, like I have strong Irish Catholic family in New York. A lot of cousins and aunts and uncles back in New York City, and they are serious Irish Catholics. So like when they saw me and they realized I wasn't a Catholic anymore, there was a lot of judgment. I mean, it was, but fortunately, my parents moved to Southern California, became a little bit more laid back. Southern California is a lot different from New York City. I'm familiar with both places, and just the stereotype of laid back Southern California is there's some truth to that, and I think it does kind of mellow everybody out. So they really didn't take their Catholicism. They kind of mellowed out with it over the years, but man, not my family in New York. I was going to hell, and I was not. And they're all Irish Catholic law enforcement people. I mean, they're hardcore. It's like they're the original gangs of New York people.
Wow. Yeah, but that's as well when I lived in the US and I was like, oh yeah, I'm Catholic. And people are like, no, you're not. Because it's like to be Catholic in the US, it's like you can't just go to church on Christmas. Like then you're a fake Catholic or
Well, I mean, you
whatever. So I was
can. I
like,
mean, there's all different types. Everybody in their religion, there's a continuum of adherence. Some people are the Christmas and Easter. Some people are the like we were Bible study 7 nights a week, take it seriously. And then you have everything in between, and whether it's Catholic, Protestant, Methodist, Lutheran, whatever. But it's funny. You haven't asked me this yet, and I'm very surprised that I don't get asked this question, especially by those who know me. And that question that I'm surprised I don't get asked is, well, what do you believe today? And I didn't know if you were going to plan on asking me that or not.
yeah, we haven't got there yet.
No, but
But
but it's
go
but
for
it
it.
it amazes me though because like I got out of ministry in 2000, basically late 2005, 2006. Started my professor job that same year, like August, and stopped going to church. And not one person that I can recall that was a friend or family member or an acquaintance ever asked me, well, what do you believe now? I always thought that was kind of, my own family didn't ask me that. My own sisters
Huh.
didn't ask me that. And I was always surprised by that. My students, I don't tell my students I used to be a pastor, but sometimes I do. If like in the course of the lecture it would be appropriate or whatever, or it would fit with what I'm trying to get across. And then they will. Well, what do you believe now? But they don't know me, so it's a little bit different.
But I feel like we don't ask that in general. Like to each other about do you I remember asking my parents that at some point of like do you actually believe in God, or now actually I ask people because I've had these experiences through like breath work. Like I did this insane breath work 2 days ago, and it's like it blows my mind every time that I'll have this super intense experience, but it's similar to like doing mushrooms, like those. And then I kind of have that going into nature, this like deep feeling of connection. Like it's like I can't really use language to describe it, but I feel something so intensely. And I'm like,
Mm.
there's no believing because it's like I've felt something. And then so and then I kind of use faith to make my life better. It's like actually because I went through depression and whatever, and there was no meaning in life, and I just didn't want to live anymore, and that was miserable. And then it's like, actually, if I believe that there's something, some higher thing that's supporting me or whatever that I can ask guidance from, it actually makes my life easier. So I'm
Mhm.
choosing to believe that. So I'm interested in having those conversations. But in terms
Well,
of
can I
like,
ask you something though, based on what you just said? You
mm,
said you're choosing to believe that.
mm,
I I believe, in fact, I don't even think it's debatable. I think religious people are generally happier than non-religious people, and I think not necessarily it's that kind of the magic of the religion that does it, but more the community it offers you. People that are in community are happier than those who are not. And what kind of deeper community is there than religion, where it's like your eternal destiny and everything, depends on this. So I agree with that. I mean, I really do. I think there's been enough evidence and studies to suggest that religious people are happier. But you can't. force yourself to believe something you don't believe. I mean, and so when you said I choose to believe it, it's like, okay, how do you do that? How do you say, okay, I'll believe in God. Sure, I'll be happier now. It's like, tell me your secret.
So I don't no, so that's the next point I was gonna say. I can't choose to so I just had this conversation with someone who was trying to convince me to go to church today, and I was like, I just don't think it's gonna happen. And my point was it because part of it is like I do have this weird loyalty to the Catholic Church, even though you could hardly say have much to do with it at all. But the other thing is that I clicked for me that I don't agree with worshipping humans, any humans. Like when there's, that massive statue of Abraham Lincoln in DC, I'm kind of like, this statue's too big. Like, yeah, he was a great guy, but he's still a human. And, I see it everywhere. Like, this is how cults form. Like, in India, like, suddenly which I love Buddhism, but then it's like you go into a temple and they've got posters of the Dalai Lama, and it's like, no, we're not worshipping him. Like, that's not what, the Buddha was saying. That's not what the message was. So with Jesus, I'm like, oh, that's the thing that makes me uncomfortable is worshipping him when he's a human and I believe what he was saying. Like, as you were saying, I love the lessons, like love one another as you love yourself, which also implies that you should love yourself and whatever, all these things, like to he who has not sinned may cast the first stone, no non-judgment, all of that, love that. But in terms of like worshipping him, it's like, I don't know if I think what he was saying is he's the Son of God and we're all children of God, like God's within all of us. That's kind of how I read it. So I could, if someone, and sometimes people do try and make you say, no, but put your hand on your heart and like pledge allegiance to this. And it's like, no, I'm not going to do that. But even though I can say Christianity, it's very important basis of our society and Western civilization and these values and forgiveness, and you don't kill infidels like other religions and things can suggest. It's like you welcome everyone regardless of belief. So that's all good. But in terms of choosing, so I wouldn't say you choose to believe in that Jesus is the Son of God or something like that, because that's where I would be like, okay, it's turning into like a cult. But so I read this book, The Universe Has Your Back, and then I read Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth, and those, first I was creeped out about this idea of like spiritual prayer, but then I realized, because I read that when I was in this deep depression, and it was like, oh, a friend suggested it to me who's like very pragmatic, like a lawyer. I was like, really? Reading this book? But it was like, yeah, I want to read a book that says the universe is supporting me because I feel like I'm in this pit of despair. And then, so that's what I mean about choosing. It was like, oh, you can choose. It's kind of like the neuroplasticity in your brain. It's like changing those thoughts from like everything is terrible, I'm suffering, like everything's so painful, to, because that's what depression is, right? It's like your thoughts can end up killing you. It's thoughts. So it's like choosing better thoughts, which is hard. It takes years. It took me 4 years. So it's not saying like it's simple, but it's not easy. And part of that is choosing to believe things like, obstacles can be opportunities, rejections, redirection, whatever. There's meaning in the suffering. And now I really have got to that point where I'm like, I'm so grateful that I went through that, because now blah, 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 it means I can connect more deeply with others, or, be there for other people in their times of darkness and hope
Yeah,
they never go
so you're
back.
saying you're not necessarily talking about, oh, I need to believe in someone like a God, as much as I need to believe in a process called the way I think, thinking positively.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And out of,
but sometimes that's hard. It's like I'm very interested in cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, where you kind of think your way out of it. But I if you really genuinely feel something deeply, I don't have the tools to think my way out of it. You know what I'm saying?
no, yeah, no, you can't think your way out of it. You have to feel. go into so, get to the root of my stuff. And as a lot of people find, it's something in childhood. There was something that happened in my childhood. Nothing bad, not on purpose, but from another sibling being sick, I then believed that there was something wrong with me. I was unlovable or like not worthy, but it's so deep in the subconscious, but it just reflected to me when I was rejected, it was so painful because it was like, it's true, I'm horrible and just broken, and and I should just die. And then it's like, so it's like you can't just change that because it's so buried. You have to
Right.
do the work to sit with that part. And then that's what I found internal family systems therapy, which I talk about a lot on this podcast, because that's truly like changed my life. But that's through hypnosis, getting into the subconscious, and it's really abstract.
Yeah.
And psychedelics, mushrooms helped me a lot as well, which is feeling, right, rather than thinking, because it's almost like your thoughts are kind of, you're not in that thinking brain, you're suddenly just like feeling the oneness of, I don't know, the universe or whatever it is.
Yeah. It's like when I have a thought that I know is irrational. I know it is. I know it. There's no basis in reality for a thought I'm having. It doesn't mean I still can't feel that. Even though I want to remove it, it's irrational. I know it's irrational. It doesn't make any sense, but I still feel it. And I think that's what you're talking about. It's like that's where you got to go deep and do the hard work and really kind of confront that in a more intentional manner. And by the way, I think one of the things that disappointing to me growing up, I thought like the older you get, like you kind of figure shit out. And some things you do, but like I feel like I am as screwed up as I've ever been. Like at 60 years old, it's like, in fact, if anything, I'm probably more in touch with my deficiencies and in touch with who I really am, because there's no reason to lie to yourself at my age. So,
In in what way do you feel like you're screwed up?
oh, I'll give you an example. I used to think that, for example, I was a very emotionally strong person, and now that I've lived some life and have lost loved ones, and I'm way more emotionally vulnerable than I ever thought I was. As an example, you I used to think, you have my shit together. No, you got plenty of issues. So I think the older I get, just the less I'm able to live in any kind of denial. Um, and I don't know if that's common. I don't know if that's, as most people age, they feel that way, or it kind of goes the opposite way. Just running out the clock, and denial is a great place to go. I'm not sure. But,
But maybe that's a good thing, because then you're living closer to the truth of your humanity.
well, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Or good. I'm just saying this is what is. Um, and I'm also a big believer that in order to fix any problem in your life, you first have to acknowledge you have it. If you don't acknowledge you have it, if you think your life is the shit, you're doing great. Great. You're not ready to fix anything though. But once you realize, I ask my class this question every semester in my critical thinking class. I said, how many of you, by a show of hands, how many of you believe you're open-minded? And just about everybody raises their hand, maybe with the exception of one or two students. And then I ask the follow-up question, how many of you believe most other people are open-minded? Nobody raises their hand. Everybody thinks everybody else is closed-minded. I said, do you understand how both of those can't be true? You either have a very highly overinflated sense of your open-mindedness with yourself, or you're incorrect in perceiving others' open or closed-mindedness. But everybody can't believe they're open-minded and at the same time believe everybody else is closed-minded. There's a disconnect there. So what I tell those two students that didn't raise their hand, I said, so you're closed-minded? And they go, yeah. I go, you guys are the two most open-minded people in the class because you realize how closed-minded you are. That's where it starts.
Mm.
Everybody likes to think they're open-minded,
Mm.
but the
Do
reality
you
is
think
very
you're
few people.
open-minded?
Um, gosh, I talk about this every day. but in many ways, no. And in many ways, yes. How's that for a political answer?
So, what are the biggest obstacles you've had to overcome in your life so far?
Me. Um, biggest obstacles.
Wait, and we didn't get to what you believe in either.
Well, you don't. We don't have to. I was just
No,
saying, what
I
are the.
want to know. But I just assume because you're a critical thinker that maybe you think I would guess, yeah, that it could be something along the lines of what I'm saying, that you're open-minded, that there could be, that there is some kind of, there's more to the world than we know about it and consciousness and whatever, but you're not
Well, I'll tell
going
you what
to
I
be
told.
dogmatic about it.
There
About,
was a guy I grew up with. His name is Dave, and we were never super close, but we were kind of friends growing up. And then he did went his way. He was a really super conservative evangelical Christian, as was I at the time. And we just reconnected now as like 60-year-old man, and went out to breakfast. And he's having a real crisis of faith. He goes, Jim, I just don't think I believe it anymore. He goes, I'm not going to be accepted by my peer groups, but I just can't believe it. He goes, and I want to know what I believe. I want to know what I believe. I want to know what I believe. I'm like, Dave, why? Because whatever you conclude doesn't mean it's right. Just because you believe something doesn't make it so. So you believe in God, great. Doesn't assure there's a God. You don't believe in God, doesn't assure there's no God. It doesn't matter. I go, so I would spend less time worrying about what you believe and commandeering that of which you actually do have some control over. Loving somebody or reaching out to somebody or doing something kind for somebody. Those are real. Those are tangible. Those are things you can do. But whatever you choose to believe, there's no guarantee what you believe has any basis in reality or is true or factual at all. So that's really kind of my response now is I don't believe there's and I'm pretty consistent because I was saying this years ago. I just don't believe what one believes is that important or relevant in many ways. I have found that there's very little relationship between what one believes and the kind of person they are, whether they're an atheist, a believer, a Christian, or whatever they are. I believe there's good people and bad people of all stripes. And I can look in your eye and see a lot more and tell a lot more by looking in your eye than I can by what comes out of your mouth.
hmm.
So that's kind of my answer to what I believe now. So my answer is like, who gives a shit? What does it matter? I believe I'm doing my podcast with you here now. And hopefully we're having kind of an invigorating conversation. I believe in this.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess if you believe in the goodness in humanity versus, because when there's a lot of people who they just have this very dark view of the world, pessimism basically. And then it's kind of like, well, I feel like it is helpful to believe in like goodness, because then it just means you're kind of a more pleasurable person to be
Well, yeah.
around.
I mean, but like I guess you could say, I believe in trying to find the best in bad situations, or I believe, I have principles that I live by I mean, a couple silly ones are like, for example, if I'm driving down the street and there's kids selling lemonade on the side of the road, I believe you must stop and support those kids. I believe that. I believe that's going to do a little thing to help contribute to make the world a better place. So no, there are certain principles that I live by and certain principles that I believe in trying to spread positivity, like you say, in all of those things. Um, but again, those are all things that I have a say in. I have a control in. What I believe kind of spiritually or religiously doesn't matter. We used to have this conversation, Renee and I had this conversation a lot about hell, the existence of hell. And one of the things that made her turn her back and run away from Christianity was the doctrine of hell. She just could not believe people would believe that there is a place of eternal torment, damnation, and torture. And I would tell her back then, again, I think I'm consistent. I would tell her back then, I go, as far as hell goes, Renee, whether you believe in it or you don't believe in it, it doesn't matter. It's not going to make it so or not so. So who cares? They say talk about hell. They don't know. We don't know if it's true or not. But see, she's probably like most people. She's like, no, I need to know what I believe, and I need to know whether there is and there isn't. And as soon as she came to the conclusion there is not, I just can't believe that. She was just done with the Christian faith. But
Hmm.
I'm like, believe or don't believe, I don't care. It's it's not going to
Hmm.
make it so.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I guess that's similar to your position at the start of the conversation on forcing a view on geopolitical events when it's kind of like it's not really of any consequence.
Yeah,
You
I guess we're seeing a theme here. It's kind of like, who the hell are you? Who cares? Who cares what you think? Who cares what you believe? Like when I approach my teaching, my personal political, cultural thoughts and convictions don't matter because that's not what I'm teaching. It's not a, this course isn't called Jimmy's Convictions. It's called critical thinking, or it's called public speaking, or whatever it is. And that's the skills that I want to teach you. So I've always undervalued what I think or my own opinion. And as a pastor, particularly, that was not well received because you're like the voice of God. You're the one that's going to tell us what we need to believe or not believe. And now you're refusing to do that. You're trying to teach us how to kind of learn how to do it on our own. I had enough of that. See ya. Have a good one.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
But I'm sure you're doing that alongside standing by your principles, right? It's not to be confused with, it's not like you wouldn't stand up and say something's wrong if you're witnessing something happening, where it's necessary to use your voice.
Yeah, wherever there's some kind of injustice, yeah, yeah, of course, yeah, I believe that. But I guess what I'm just talking about, kind of just more in terms of, um, don't think that what you believe is the end all be all. It's just kind of what you believe to be the case. But there's a lot of different beliefs out there, a lot of different ways to approach it. Just hold on to them loosely. Have them, but just hold on to them loosely. Be open, be flexible to kind of to modifying those beliefs, what they happen to be. So I
Yeah.
guess you could say I would be the opposite of a dogmatic person. Not sure what the opposite of a probably open-minded, but there's very few things in life I'm dogmatic about. It is this way. Especially for an old guy like me, a lot of things are happening in like the transgender community. We're changing pronouns now, and some very fundamental shifts taking place in society. And I feel like if I didn't have that kind of openness just to change or go with it, or who cares if we call somebody him, her, they, it doesn't matter to me. If I was a bit more dogmatic, I think kind of even accepting those kinds of changes would be much more difficult for me.
Hmm.
So I think by becoming a less dogmatic person, you become a more flexible person that I would like to think is open to growth and change.
Hmm. I find that difficult, but I think it's when it's forced upon me in a dogmatic way. That is what I don't like. That it's like, this is the new way you must speak, and it feels like it's being, forced upon me. Which is different to if someone politely asked me, like, these are my preferences, then
Oh, no,
that's
no.
different.
Yeah, I mean, 100. It's funny. I was just having this conversation the other day with somebody, but yeah, no, that's 100% true. Um, you know, I tell people I was at our college. I was bringing a transgender speaker to speak to my classes in the campus 12 years ago, before Caitlyn Jenner was a thing, before people even really knew what transgender even meant. But I had a friend, Georgia, who transitioned at like 71 years old from George to Georgia. Fascinating story. And so I was always kind of seen as that kind of, oh, this guy's bringing transgender people to campus. Like he's really kind of progressive and open to this kind of new thought form. And it was essentially a new thought form at that time. And so I was really open to the whole idea of woke and let's right the injustices of the past. And so when all this talk first started happening, and I felt I was very progressive on this, but I think it all evolved to what you're saying now, where what started out as a really good idea has evolved to, oh, well, if you don't agree with these 10 specific things, you're against us. Wait, so if I if I don't identify a pronoun, I'm anti-trans, and I'm the one that's bringing a trans speaker to class for 12 years. Like, it's just too incongruent. And I feel like what's happening in society right now is those who have been historically and traditionally bullied are becoming the bullies. Like now they're getting some leverage, they're getting some power, and we're going to get back at you assholes, particularly you white male assholes, who are the ones that have been putting us down for these years. So I understand that point of view and position, and God, I hope it's just an overcorrection currently, and we'll kind of come back to kind of more of a middle ground, sane position. That
Yeah.
yes, I can disagree with you on a few things, and it doesn't make me fill in the blank. It doesn't make
Yeah.
me a whatever. I just don't
Yeah.
agree on that point. And I think most people are that way, but I think, we're almost trained to believe that, oh, this side believes this and this side believes that. And there are people like that on both extreme sides, but most people aren't. Most people are kind of somewhere in between.
Yeah. And that again, I think goes back to your original points about, well, it requires courage to be able to say what you think out loud and then to give each other, the, to respect that people are trying to figure things out in good faith and
Hmm.
to not hold everyone so, to not, because sometimes we have to talk to be able, like me right now, trying to figure out what the hell we're talking about. And if you don't give people the opportunity to figure things out through conversation, then it just doesn't, like the thing with if Trump supporters can't even say why they like Trump, then they're just going to get angrier and go, and just stay
Right.
closer together and then end up causing, like, no human wants to, isn't that's like the whole flat earthers thing. It's like some of them, it's like they don't even believe that, but they're just so upset that no one will listen to them that they just have to find this group of people where they can finally belong. So,
Right, right, right. And that's one reason I'm so big into advocacy, because when people are silenced or they don't feel comfortable to bring up their position or to talk, there is this illusion of agreement. When in reality, there's no agreement at all. They just don't want to get crucified. They just don't want to get railed. And the more we foster that crucifying ethos, that crucifying, you know, style, um, I just think the world is worse off for it. That we need to be more open. And again, a lot of reasons for it: social media, news, all kinds of things. But happily, I do think those are the extremes, and most fall in the middle somewhere.
yeah, for sure. So Jordan told this story on the podcast about that you would, because I asked, I think, what were the values you grew up with, and he said, well, actually, we would talk about them. We would
Yeah.
have this. These are the family values.
Yeah, it's funny. I even remember before Jordan was born. I remember I was driving down the 5 freeway with Renee in the car heading to Burbank from where we live in Santa Clarita, and I said, okay, so we're planning on having 3, 4, 5 kids. Say what are the values? We should have a plan here. Like, what values we both agree on that we need to teach these kids? You know, there could be 2, 3, 4, 5, 10. Who knows how many? And so, we came up with these values, and I think Jordan kind of touched on them. Although this is kind of the whole remember thing. He said one of the values was independence, and that was not one of our values. But I understand why he would say it, because it's individualism. Individualism was one of our values. But I could see how independence and individualism can kind of get confused. But I don't see them as the same thing. I just think it's more of a cultural orientation, kind of where you see yourself in terms of society. Do you see yourself as an individual or part of more of the collective experience? So yeah, so we talked about these, and quite frankly, I think we taught them too well. I think we did too good a job teaching those values. And Jordan alluded to this because they all embrace those values to an extreme, to an extreme. And
And
for
what are the
example,
values again?
if I was going to change one of the values, it would have been individualism. Our my kids are the most fierce individualist to ever live on this planet. And whether you're a collectivist or an individualist, both have an upside and both have a downside. They really, if you come from a collectivistic culture, there are some bad parts to that, but there's some great parts to it too. But it seems like my family, they really embrace that whole individual thing at the expense of the collective. Like, can you give in just this once? And they do, but it's all about maintaining my identity sometimes. And they got it from me. But the more older I get, I'm just a little bit more mellow about it. I'm not quite as into maintaining my independent integrity as much as I used to be. So what
What?
were they? Let's see if I can even remember. They were individualism, tolerance, sense of humor, creativity, and damn, it's acceptance. And that was probably more intolerance. Okay, sense of humor is my son Stevie. My son Stevie is a stand-up comedian, so he got the whole sense of humor thing. Jordan could be any number of. He could be the creativity guy. He's definitely the individualist guy. I have a daughter who's a tattoo artist in Portland, who used to be a communication studies professor with me at Crafton, but she gave it all up to become a tattoo artist to scratch that creative itch that she has. Um, and so, yeah, those are the only four I can remember at the moment. There was a fifth, but it was kind of like the fifth Beatle, a little vague.
And
But
do
we
you
taught them. We taught them well. We taught them.
and have you lived by all of them?
Well, the reason we chose those is because we thought that those values really embraced who we were, whether you like those values or you don't like those values. The only value, once again, that Renee, she probably compromised on at my request was individualism. She's not an individualist at all. She's 100% collectivist. And so even though she agreed to have that as one of our family values, um, she regrets it, and so do I. I wish
So
that wasn't part of them.
what does individualist mean as opposed to collective?
Well, okay, I teach an intercultural communication class, and we have these different kind of cultural orientations. And you have cultures that are very collectivistic and cultures that are very individualistic. The United States, very individualistic. A lot of Asian countries, very collectivistic. And it basically, the way I like to think of it is it's basically in terms of how one sees themselves. Do you see yourself first through the lens of yourself? So you ask me who I am. Oh, I'm Jimmy. I'm a communication studies professor. Yeah, I have four kids. I have a degree, whatever. And I just start talking about me. Or you say, Jimmy, who are you? You say, oh, I am part of the Urbanovich clan. I am the son of Steve and Agnes, and I am the father. In other words, every description of myself is through the filter of the collective and not through the filter of the individual. And so it's at face value, it seems like, well, collectivist people kind of are more morally superior because they look at others. But actually, collectivistic cultures can be really selfish because they tend to be more hostile to outsiders. Like if you're not part of our collective in-group, you're not coming to our Thanksgiving dinner, for example. Use an American example, U.S. example. Whereas in very individualistic cultures, yeah, come on over for Thanksgiving. My family's not going to care because we don't guard the sacredness of the collective like some cultures do. So yeah, you're all welcome to come on. So to me, it's not necessarily individual, selfish, collective, unselfish, because I think both have their ups and their downs. I always thought the positive side of individualism was you're going to be a strong person. You're going to have your own identity. You're not going to succumb to peer pressure. And those are all positive things about individualism is you tend to be pretty rogue and know who you are and you have your identity and you're sticking to it. And that can be a very good thing, especially growing up. And that was my thought when my kids were small was, peer pressure is a real thing and you got to develop a strong enough sense of self to be able to withstand that peer pressure. But of course, as they grow up and as they grow up, the individualism, yeah, it can serve you well in certain circumstances, but it can work to your detriment too. So does that make more sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just thinking, and me and Jordan talked about this as well briefly, but I'm just thinking about Milei's speech at the World Economic Forum, the Argentinian president.
I never saw that
Talking,
speech.
he talks a lot about collectivism, but I think he means it more in the way of, well, I don't know if he, well, like Marxism, communism, but he's also talking about the kind of speech against like the social justice, like this social like do-gooders who are actually, it's not about growing the pie, it's about like taking things away from other people and blah blah blah. And yeah, I don't know. He's talking about taxes coercion, which, yeah, today I got my tax bill and I definitely feel like I'm being coerced because it's true. Like, not many people would voluntarily pay taxes. Anyway, but the word collectivism comes up so many times in that speech. So,
Well, and you can look at collectivism through kind of the micro lens or the macro lens, and it sounds to me like he's referring to the macro lens, kind of, we pay taxes. That's a very collectivistic activity. You're giving money as an individual to the collective, but it doesn't necessarily mean in a micro sense you see yourself in that way. So I think, there you can be a collective kind of in the larger sense, but in an individual sense, you could be more of an individual. I don't know that much about him. Jordan has talked to me a little bit about him. I always thought he was like this really rogue individualist. I didn't, so it's kind of surprised me you said that.
yeah, I think he is quite rogue still as well. But yeah,
Yeah.
no, but I think that is important as well because the thing that we were talking about earlier about community, right? Because it can go too far, or a part of it, when you're so focused on yourself and your career and who are you going to be. And then, like me, you end up like depressed. And a quick way out of depression is like, how can you help someone else? And then you realize that, being part of something, that's what we are. Humans, we're social creatures. Like, you're just miserable if you're not connected to others and helping others.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. Jordan, he lives in Hawaii, and Hawaii tends to be, certain cultures that have kind of more adversity tend to be more collectivistic because you kind of need each other and that kind of thing. But I've noticed too, in kind of his kind of, for lack of a better term, hippie circles and everything. Um, Even though it's all about, hey, we're all going to help each other out and be there for each other, there's still a strong sense of individualism there, and it's almost like their groups are like a collection of 10 individuals coming together, as opposed to just kind of coming together and forming one group. It still feels very individualistic to me. Um, so I think both can be at play, again, on both the macro and the micro, but also situationally, how you kind of look at things. But, you do need both. I mean, you need to be a strong individual to survive, but we also need each other too. So both are true. But if I could change it, I would have changed it to collectivism. But that's the 60-year-old me talking.
Nice.
But
Okay.
the other thing too, and I don't remember this. Jordan said this. He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "They really, like, they would come in and tuck us in at night and give us a lesson on, sense of humor or whatever." And it's funny. I think, did I do that? I don't. Maybe I did do that, but It's funny how he so prominently remembered that, and I don't even remember doing it. And I thought maybe one night, oh, I'll just bullshit with him about sense of humor. I don't know. But he made it sound so formal. It's like I never really remember it being like a formal program. It was just things would bring up every now and then, but it was interesting to hear his take on it. I really enjoyed hearing his take on
Nice. I'm glad. Yeah, I love his thing when I was asking like, what did your parents think about your lifestyle, like hitchhiking around and kind of, living this life. And he said, well, my dad said, well, you're not calling me and asking me for money and you're not in prison.
it.
So,
And you know what? Let me kind of explain that because it's true. Um, because living the kind of life he lives, meeting the people he meets, there's a lot of room for trouble in there. There's a lot of room to, you know, for bad situations. And I think he mentioned one when he was in Austin, Texas. Somebody committed suicide in their house, and there could be some freaky things kind of going on in there. But let me tell you, the first time Jordan left home was he studied in France for almost an entire year, his sophomore year of college, and he traveled all throughout Europe. And the whole time he was gone, it was he's our oldest. He was the first one to go anywhere. We all took him to the airport. We all bawled our eyes out when he was leaving. Like, it was a huge deal for him to leave for a year and go study abroad. Huge. It was the first one. Now we had four, and they all subsequently did. It got to the point where, like, take an Uber to the airport, asshole. Like, you know what I mean? It went from this family event all crying to, all right, man, have a good one. When I'll see you? January? Great. See you then. Um, but I remember, so we took him to the airport. I remember the day, and he went off, and we would follow him on Facebook and make sure, where is he doing? What's he okay? And all that kind of thing. But he didn't tell us a lot. But when he got back, I remember that night, he started telling us stories about him hitchhiking to Germany, for example. Um, and Renee and I looked at each other and go, we are so glad he didn't tell these stories while they were happening. We would not have slept at night. I mean, I was glad we were ignorant of most of the shit he was doing, because I mean, you don't understand his life. I heard those podcasts. You don't know a fraction of it. I mean, he is so understated and so humble, but he has done things and experienced things that are just insane. Just insane. And so at first it was hard for us, but then it just became our norm. Oh, our kids leave, they go on adventures, and we just got used to it. And so, we just became fine with it. Man, we knew what he was doing, and we knew he was naked in Bulgaria riding a hippo or something. Who the hell knows? While taking LSD. But you get used to it. But at first it was hard. There was definitely a period of time you had to adjust to that lifestyle for your kids. So, but he is a
Okay.
hell of an adventurer, man.
Last question, unless you have anything else to add. Well, I have to ask you three quick questions at the end.
Okay.
But before we get there, what is your vision for the rest of your teaching career?
That is a very, 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 very extremely relevant question right now. I'm going to be 61 in a few weeks. Technically, I mean, I can retire right now if I want to, but economically, it doesn't make sense for me to retire for about 2 more years. So when I'm 63, if you would have asked me before the pandemic about retirement, I would have just laughed. I said, they're going to have to cart me out. I'm not quitting. But now I'm really seriously considering retirement. And the reason is I love teaching as much as I've ever loved it. But Delia, now we're being coerced to do things that, like I told you earlier, I'm like an old school liberal free speech person. And I see those principles being eroded every day. The fact that I'm still teaching and I haven't gotten in trouble for shit, yeah, I'm shocked, because it doesn't take a lot to offend people these days. And so I'm looking at the state of education. I'm like, even though I love teaching as much as I've ever loved it, I don't know how much longer I can survive in that framework. For example, last spring, I was having my 4-year evaluation. As a tenured professor, you get evaluated in our district every 4 years. And I was being evaluated by our vice president of instruction, who's, pretty high ranking guy at our school. And all they cared about, all they cared about for the evaluation was, is there any like disproportionate impact on certain groups and cultures? Like, how are your Hispanics faring in your classes? How are your blacks faring? How are your Asians faring? How are the Pacific Islanders faring? That's all they cared about. Well, like, you had, 59% of your Hispanic students got a C. What's the problem? Why isn't that closer to 73% of it? In other words, I now have to see everything through color, through ethnicity. And to the point where he said, here's what we're going to do. He goes, starting in the fall, this was spring of 23, so starting in the fall, on your rosters, we're going to give you every student's ethnicity. You need to know what every student's ethnicity is. And I said, okay, I'm open. I'm really open. If that's going to help me with some good instructional ideas or can improve my instruction, that's great. I said, so what do I do with that information? Now that I know the ethnicity of all my students, what do I do? And he didn't have an answer, because I'm not sure. He goes, but just be a team player and just figure it out. Maybe you can figure something out of why it's helpful to get it. I said, great. Oh, he goes, oh, I just remembered. He goes, I went to a conference at USC and we found out Hispanics like quizzes. What? What the fuck did you just say? Like, Hispanics like quizzes? And that's rationale for why I need to know all my students' ethnicities, because there is a study that suggests that Hispanics like quizzes, which was, I don't know how you hear that, Delia. That is the silliest thing I ever heard. Like, oh, so every Hispanic like quizzes. So the other day at my class last Thursday, I said, how many Hispanics do we have in here? Some students raised their hand. I go, do you guys like quizzes? We hate quizzes. We'd rather have a midterm. I go, well, there goes my theory for that. So in other words, the whole point I even told that story is the whole shape of education is just changing. And we're being taught to see everything through the lens of race now, and color, skin color. And, you
Which is
need to
literally what racism is.
exactly. But I'm a conservative fuck for thinking that. Like, but it just doesn't make
It's
any sense to me. Like, so
it's
I said,
oh
Keith,
my
should I
God,
put
it's
all the
crazy.
Hispanics in that corner, all the blacks in that corner, all the Asians in that corner?
And treat them differently. Like
I
that's the
treat them
what the
differently.
point of the terrors we've seen in the past is treating people differently based on their race.
I know.
It's
And
crazy.
but see, you can see this is what I'm dealing with. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And like one of the guys I work with in my department is just like, yeah, it must be really hard for you, like an older guy like you. It's like, okay, that's an ad hominem attack on my age. You still haven't given me a good reason why knowing ethnicity helps. I am hope. Give me a good reason. How will it make me a better instructor? And I am open to it, but I don't see it. I mean, I do teach in public speaking, particularly. We teach, the secret ingredient to any good speech, a large part of it is knowing your audience. You have to know who you're talking to in order to connect with them. The language choices you use, and knowing their age, race, those are all very important things. So I understand the importance of knowing your audience. But what happened is ethnicity has gone to the front of the line. Like, that's the most important thing to know. And I take issue with that. I don't think it's irrelevant completely, because that might explain something, the way they grew up in their cultural leanings. So I don't dismiss it, but I don't view that as, oh, that's the number one thing to learn, because that will tell you if they like quizzes or not, for example. I think there's other things. Probably class is more important than that. Growing up poor, growing up rich, and you can be white, black, Hispanic, be any one of those things. So I just don't see race as going to the top of the chart as far as what our concerns should be, as far as the kind of the demographical analysis of the class. I think
Mm.
that should be a lot lower, because I don't think race tells you personality dispositions, where maybe class would. It would explain some things. Age, I think, is an important one to know. How a 17-year-old processes versus a 27-year-old can explain some things. But I just don't see race, and right now it's all race all the time. So there you go. So what is my vision? I wish I had an answer to that question. I'm hoping between now and you know June of 2026, when I could retire, I'm hoping it changes and we start to see the ship corrected. And I'll stay. I'll keep teaching. I'll keep teaching until they won't have me anymore. But if not, um, I got to find something else to do, and I'm not sure what that is. But I've done it before. I can pivot.
Yeah, new chapter.
Yeah, it gets a little bit harder as you get older. Your your neural pathways pretty rigid at some point, but it's good for you. Neuroplasticity, stretch that shit out.
Yeah. Um, yeah, sorry, that's so funny. On the race point today, I was talking to someone who runs this new like tech careers thing for university, so it connects with society, so employers can directly target like the law society or whatever it is. And he was saying like, yeah, some of them really want to use it to target ethnicities, because if they want to directly recruit like someone of this ethnicity, they can just go to, whatever, the Hispanic society. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that's illegal under like the our
Right, right.
laws of discrimination in hiring. It's like you are not supposed to discriminate on race, but it's funny that this is kind of the point we've got to in the world. But I don't know. I feel like it might be reversing, especially after this recent Harvard stuff with the anti-Semitism and
That's crazy. Well, I don't know if you know the American football team, the New England Patriots. They just hired a new head coach. This football doesn't matter, but he just said in his press conference, he says, if you don't see color, you don't see racism. He was, they just hired a black head coach. In other words, you have to see color. You have to see color because if you don't, you'll never see racism. And that's kind of the philosophical difference there is, I think seeing color perpetuates racism, where he says you can't even notice it if you don't see it. I can appreciate philosophical difference there. I see the world differently than that man does. But again, that's kind of the world. We're now being retrained to see color again. And yeah, isn't that illegal? You're right. That is that should be illegal. So
mm. Okay, last three quick questions. How do you stay grounded?
um, about 7 or 8 years ago, I did start to meditate, and meditating is, as sounds like from everything you told me today, you've probably done your fair share. Um, it's really hard, man. Meditation and yoga, those are two things I know I need to do more of, but man, they're hard. It's like you can't stand. But I've been trying to meditate more, and I have a couple of meditation apps. And I also set my alarm every day to go off, and whatever I'm doing at that moment in time, whether I don't care if I'm driving or I'm talking to you or I'm teaching or I'm in the shower, for that minute that alarm goes off and that song is playing, I need to have a moment. I need to come back and have that moment of meditation. But it's a work in progress. It's really really hard to do, and I'm trying to really. Sam Harris is one app that I used to use for meditation, and he says look for the one who's looking. And I never knew quite what that meant until about 6 months ago. Like look for the one who's looking. And you see that there's two parts of yourself. There's kind of the core you, there's you, and then there's all the stuff that's going on in your life. So like when you're feeling really anxious, you say, I'm feeling anxious, but that anxiety doesn't define me. But that is what that part of me is experiencing that right now. So to me, meditation is being able to separate yourself from that anxiety and kind of look at it as an impartial observer. Oh yeah, there's the anxiety. But I'm back here. You know, I, I'm looking for the one who's looking. And so just to be able to kind of separate yourself and kind of, I think finding peace in that part of you that's looking at the anxiety or whatever it is you happen to be feeling and being peaceful in that place to me is the goal of meditation. But it's funny, if you would have asked me, 25, 30 years ago, it would have been, oh, Jesus is my foundation. It would have been kind of a religiously based question. Probably 10, 15 years ago, my family would have been the answer to that. But, my family is grown and gone. And, we have philosophical differences, not big ones, but some. We don't agree on everything, that's for sure. So even my family that I kind of saw my identity as I'm the patriarch, I'm the father, that's kind of gone now too. I don't really see myself that way. So you're asking the $1 million questions. How am I grounded? I don't know. Um, and my future, I don't know. So,
That's what I was thinking about, that vulnerability that you're saying now that you're feeling these things. I was wondering if that's to do with this idea with the family, how it's like, okay, so then when you're the patriarch, the provider, the protector, raising these children, giving them the values, it's like you have to be this strong person who obviously you still have vulnerabilities, but you have to kind of like, you can't show that as much, I guess, to your children. And then now that's gone, that you can kind of be more free from that.
Maybe, yeah, that's a part of it, but that was more like when they were young. But I think it's more this. I really believe in like midlife crisis, and I believe we all experience a crisis when we fundamentally change the way we see ourselves. That's a crisis, right? We're reinterpreting and redefining the way we see ourselves. And though kind of in my early years, I could saw myself as a child of Jesus or something like that. Then I saw myself as a father. Like my self identity was wrapped up in me being a father. I chose my I chose my occupations based on the availability of me to be able to be a good dad. I coached all their teams. I was the team parent for their schools. I really invested in it, and I took a lot of pride in fatherhood. I want to be the best father I can be. And in the last few years, I have been criticized for some of the things I did with my kids growing up. And that was just a gut check, slap in the face, because that was the only thing in life that really mattered to me, was being a good dad. And then to be told of all my shortcomings and everything I did wrong, which, by the way, I don't disagree with. I was a very young father. I made mistakes, for sure. But having that kind of, the lid blown off that cover was very painful. So the identity kind of started with religion. It started with family. And now that that lid's been blown off, I'm like, I'm not really sure. And then even with education, even seeing myself through the lens of professor, I'm not even sure how much longer that's going to go on. So I think life is a continual process of redefining yourself and seeing yourself as you evolve and change. And so right now, I think post-pandemic, I'm still in that crisis process. Okay, what is this new identity that's going to emerge? God knows when. You know.
Hmm. Is that criticism from your children of how you parented?
Yes, yes, it is.
Yeah, I think, I guess that's a reminder to all of us to be kind to our parents and remember they're humans. Because I think I went through that phase a bit with my parents, which was just going through when you dig up the childhood stuff, and then a lot of the such stuff in psychology, it's like, oh, if your parents didn't provide this for you, and then suddenly you're like, oh my God, you fucked me
It's
up.
all their fault. I know, I know. And you know
But
what, Delia, here's what keeps me in check. When I look at some of the things that have happened to me over the last few years, I can't get upset because I did the same thing to my parents, the exact same thing. And I wanted to blame them and blame them. But conversely, if you would have told me at the time, okay, well, you're blaming. What do you want them to do at this point? I wouldn't have had an answer. I don't know. They can't go to therapy with me, right? I mean, I wouldn't have an answer. And like even now, I'm like, okay, you can criticize me. I did this, I did that, I did the other thing. It's not I can apologize, and I have, but outside of that, there's not a hell of a lot I can do. So I understand the need for a child to be able to express themselves and their frustration. I did it. But I think you just reach a point where, hey, your answers have got to come from you. I don't care how you're brought up. I don't care what mistakes your parents made. That's then. This is now. Figure it out. So, and look at all of us are living out the curses of our parents, right? I'm living out the curses of mine. My kids are living out the curses of me, and their kids live out the curses of them. It's just welcome to real life.
yeah, and it's carried through the now we know about this like intergenerational stuff, that it is like it's carried down because each generation is affecting the rest. So, and people are just doing the best they can do. And
Let's hope so. I think I certainly tried the best I could. Um, but that doesn't mean you were perfect by any stretch.
no, but none of us can be perfect, right? Which comes back to the whole
I'm just curious. You,
religious.
you, you said you kind of got on your parents. How old were you when you kind of had that lashing out of your parents?
Well, I guess it was more part of the process. So late 20s,
Yeah,
but it
sounds
was,
about
but, but I because yeah, there's so much pain there when I realized like what this 4-year-old inside me feeling like she wasn't loved enough, whatever it was. And but then it takes time, and then you realize, yeah, they're doing you don't, it's just complicated. There was nothing deliberate, there's no deliberate abuse or anything like that, right? And then I kind of move through to this phase that I'm in now where I'm so grateful for like I love my parents. They're visiting London at the moment.
Oh,
I'm like
really?
love hanging out with them like all the time.
How
And
old are you
I'm
now, if you don't mind me asking?
31.
Okay, so this is relatively recent.
Well,
This
yeah, I was still always close with them, but yeah, I think it was this kind of like bit, which I think that kind of terrified that on this podcast. I mean, not so
Right,
much
right.
my
No,
dad, more my
believe
mum,
me,
but
one reason I wanted to listen to Jordan, I wonder how he's going to throw me under the bus. But actually, Jordan, he would never do that. Even if he legitimately could, he wouldn't do it. But yeah, but it has gotten to that point where I'm at the age where my kids are at the age of it's time to blame mommy and daddy, and I get it. Like I said, I went through it myself. I get it, but it's hard being on this end of it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, and because you read these books, which these books probably should come with that disclaimer of like, because when they're saying like, oh yeah, your parent, like this attachment style is because this happened and blah, 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 they should probably say like, by the way, your parents might have not, everyone's trying their best, might not have been deliberate and like, but yeah, now I guess what you're saying at the start with losing your parents, now I've become so aware that it's like my parents will not be around forever, and that's like
Mhm.
so sad, and that's like a scary thought. I often get quite anxious about it, which isn't very helpful. But now it's more like the gratitude, and I've moved through it, and I'm so grateful for them, and yeah, and I do really love them, even though it's like we don't have, emotional language that much in my family, so we're like get learning how to, say these things that we care about each other. But then I'm like, it's amazing. You get to grow, relationships grow and evolve, and then now I am kind of, you know, feel guilty a bit for making them feel bad. But I think it's so I'm sure that your kids will probably go on that cycle as well.
Yeah, and I might even be I'm overstating it, but it's just my identity was so wrapped up in it that even the most mild criticism really hurts. And I think, Delia, what the key is, I mean, there are bad parents out there that don't give a shit, of course. But I feel like if you can say to yourself, I have no doubt my parents cared, they loved me, and they tried. Whatever comes after that is a distant second. If those things can be said and are true, good, you're fortunate. Um, Again, doesn't mean they made mistakes. Or if you say, you know what, no, my dad left. He never gave a shit. Be pissed. I get it, right? But if you can say, no, they did try. In fact, I was in London this past summer at a pub talking to one of my, I have a friend of a friend, and he is getting in touch with his father who left when he was young, and like they went out to lunch a few times, and now they're as a 30, probably your age, maybe even a little older, they're reconnecting and having this relationship. And I just thought to myself, wait a minute, I was team dad. I coached all their teams. I never went to a bar after work. I came straight home, played with the kids, did this, did that, and my kids are having a problem with me. This guy checks out when he was 3, and now they have this great relationship. Maybe I should have just stopped and went to the bar after work. Maybe that would have been a better strategy. But that's me and my pity party. But again, I'm really coming out of that new kind of transition where I can't really see myself through the lens of fatherhood. But I am seeing myself somewhat through the lens of grandpa now, which is kind of cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think with what you're saying, regardless of your childhood, whatever happened, it's like take as an adult, you have to take radical responsibility for your life. And then that's why it's so powerful, the work I found, because you get to reparent yourself. Because, yeah, you can't go back in time and make your mum like give you that attention or whatever that you needed when you were 4, but it was like physically impossible for her to do so because she was doing whatever 10 other things. But you can, through your self-conscious, do that yourself. And then it's like,
Well, and I also noticed the most critical children are those that don't have kids yet. Like, start having kids, and you probably get a little more empathy.
yeah,
Yeah, it's really easy to be a critic when you're standing back, right? Um, but if you're in the game, it's a whole different thing.
yeah,
But you can't say that. Well, you don't have kids, you don't know. That's very offensive. But there is an element of truth to it too. Like, live it, know what it feels like, and then see if you judge your parents quite as harshly.
yeah, yeah. Okay, is there a book that's had a big influence on your life?
Yeah, Dr. Leonard Shlain, The Alphabet versus the Goddess, The Conflict Between Word and Image, had a very profound effect on me. And basically, Dr. Leonard Shlain, he's passed away. He was a brain surgeon, and he basically specialized in looking at both hemispheres of the brain, the left and the right hemisphere of the brain, and how they interact, and how your hemispheres of your brain affects culture and society. And the reason I would bring that up as one of the top books that have changed me is because I read that book when I was transitioning out of ministry into education. And I would not have been open to many of the things he was saying perhaps 10 years before that. But that book literally gave me an entirely new way of looking at the world through more of a critical academic sense as opposed to kind of a religious Christian sense. Um, and just the way he attempts to explain culture and human behavior throughout history, all based on the left and right hemispheres of the brain. Really a fascinating book. And he basically says, the alphabet and images have always constantly been at war with each other. Those cultures, okay, I'll talk about Leonard Shlain all day, but like those cultures that are word centric, they write a lot, they're literate, they tend to be highly more aggressive and hostile than image based cultures, that, drawing on caves, and they have more of an oral tradition, less than a written tradition. Um, and it's basically because the hemisphere of your brain responsible for writing is the same hemisphere that's responsible for aggression, and very kind of traditionally masculine types of behaviors. And the left brain is the opposite. Or, excuse me, the right brain is the opposite. Left brain controls the right brain controls the left. So anyway, it was just an interesting way of looking at the world. Not that I even agreed with all his theories and everything, but just the fact that it was fun to explore kind of different theories and different ways to look at the world. And again, I love it. I love looking at people, and when someone can explain why groups of people behave the way they do, I'm down. So just to kind of read his theories was fantastic.
What were your master's degrees in, by the way?
Communication studies. Then it was called speech communication. Was my first one, and then I got my second one in theology, practical theology.
Nice.
Yeah, I got that, but the second one I got much older. I got my first one by the time I was 25. I think I got my second by the time I was 40.
Okay, last question. What 3 words describe the best version of you?
Worst would be a lot easier.
Okay, what are the worst?
No, we'll go with best. Well, critical. I'm critical. Um, I think that's good. I think people need to be more critical. And by critical, I don't mean negative. I just mean like analytical, looking at things, and digging deeper, and not just hearing an idea at face value and agreeing or disagreeing with it before you even know the details of it. That's being critical. And so, critical. I'm thinking of particularly when I lecture, I'm pretty spirited. I care a lot. I care about my students a lot. It's important for me to know all my students' backstory to the best of the ability that I can. So I think in that sense, I'm very caring. Renee describes me this way. She goes, "You don't care about a lot, but what you care about deep, deep, deeply." I care deeply about my students. So I don't know, maybe critical, caring. Should I come up with another C? Christ-like. I was kidding. Critical,
You
caring,
can have that.
and I'm pretty good with money. Kind of financially astute. I know that's not what you were looking for, but
That's welcome.
there you go. All right, well, thank you.
I think you need to keep teaching if you care that much about your students and you're a critical thinker. I think you need to hold on through the battle against critical thinking.
Yeah, well, it's a two-way street. They're going to have to want me too. Like I said, I'm very surprised. I mean, I've gotten in trouble before, but not to the level that would rise to letting me go. But it wouldn't surprise me that, I mean, you could say the most innocuous, seemingly innocent things these days, and it gets interpreted and this, that, and the other thing in higher education too, we're so much into catering to students. It's like the customer is never wrong. We're treating students like customers now, and not like students who need to be taught. And so I still have kind of that old school figure. In fact, I began this thing with I paid for my own college. When I went to LA Valley College in 1981, I never saw a counselor. I had to figure it all out on my own. I had to pay for it. I had to figure it out. And I'm not saying that's great. I'm not saying, well, the way I did it is the preferred way. I'm just saying that explains kind of my orientation about how I like to treat students and not coddle them quite as much as the school would like me to. Of course, I'm sure they wouldn't see it as coddling, but I would. So we'll see what happens. I hope the ship turns and it works. The other thing that's on my mind is I think, well, wait, once I turn 63 and I can retire, the real me is going to come out and fire me. Who cares?
Well, then I guess you can always go to like the University of, is it Austin, the Free Speech University? Oh, there's a few of them
No,
popping up.
they're that actually. I haven't heard about this in a while, but there's like somebody started a brand new college, I think in Texas, that
Yeah,
is just based on free speech. Okay.
yeah.
So maybe. No, also there's different like program like free speech programs. I'm thinking, hey, maybe I'll get a job with like one of these companies that go out and they kind of promote programs to foster free speech. I would be very satisfied doing something like that too. So
Nice.
we'll see.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. It's been an odd way to get to know someone.